So one of the things I wanted you to think about with an obituary is a lot of times people think that they can be macabre or kind of death, like they're about the person's death. They're not about their death, they're about their life. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, if somebody was shot and killed, and you decide to do an obit on that person, and sometimes that happens like for no other reason, you do the obit because somebody got shot and killed. But what happens is don't think that the focus should not be on how they were killed. If it's the focus is on how they got killed, then you're not doing a story about their death. You're doing a story about. Let me try to say this again. If you're doing a story about how they got killed, then it's not an obituary. An obituary is about the person's life. And so they are very life affirming, and they are very much about the person's life. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. If you have a story and somebody got shot and killed, you might want to include that information. But the focus should be on who the person was, what they did, what they contributed, and tell their life story, give information about it. Okay? Now, there's a few things I want to caution you about with obituaries. First of all, obituaries are written about people who've died. So, you're, of course, looking for people to talk to you. So, there's always a little bit of how are you going to go about getting that information? Well, your best bet is you can call the family, and that's perfectly acceptable. If but it can be a little bit, I'm just going to be honest with you, like calling up, like, somebody whose kid just got killed, or somebody who's, maybe who... their father or mother just died, or husband died, calling them up and saying, hey, I want to do a story, can I talk to you? A lot of times they're willing to, but sometimes it's just, you never know what kind of state they're in, and it can be a little bit, there could definitely be a psychological barrier to starting that conversation as a reporter. Now, as a reporter, you get used to that, but at the same time, it's not a comfortable or fun thing to have to engage. With that in mind, what I always recommend is kind of you start at the edges. It's sort of the way you cover any big story. Like if there's a murder or anything, you start at the edge, talk to the neighbors, maybe then talk to a family member. Kind of you work your way into the middle of the story. And I think the same thing can be said there. You go on Facebook, you see who some of their friends are. Maybe you happen to be friends with them. You call up some of them. Maybe you know that the person used to work over at, Joe Blow company. Well, you can call that company and probably, even though one of their colleagues has died or a former colleague has died, they're going to be sad and everything, but they're not probably going to be emotionally distraught. They'll be upset, but that will probably be where it ends. And so you can talk to them. And then maybe you'll say, well, do you have anybody else? Like, do you know any family members? How are they doing? Would you mind, like, giving me a cousin or a brother or something? And then you kind of work your way. And then as you talk to them, they say, well, yeah, you should talk to his widow or you should talk to this person. And so that's kind of the way you would cover it. You kind of start at the edges and work your way in. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you do mess up an obituary, and you get some facts wrong, you kind of want to be really careful with the facts, double check them, triple check them, double verify, just as you would with any news story. But I think an obituary is also very important because if you screw up some of the facts on that, people oftentimes they're emotional, and the person they'll blame is you because you're the one who is an easy way to vent. They're already mad. They're looking for somebody. They're mad. They're looking for somewhere to vent their frustration, and you gave them this thing. There's this old, like people talk about having a chip on your shoulder. There's an old thing about like that. It was actually a tradition that like there's an idea here, like in our culture, in the American culture, it is not unusual. Like there's the idea that if you want to fight, like if you want to get in a fight with somebody, you throwing the first punch is unacceptable. But if somebody else does something to you, you have every right to defend yourself in our culture and our society. And so one of the things that sometimes gets done with that is one of the things that sometimes gets done with that, like your right to defend yourself, is there's an old thing about like walking around with a chip on your shoulder, and apparently it was not unusual like in a certain American culture, and I don't even remember where it was, but I'd have to look up the article, and I have it in my office, but I don't remember the exact location. But there were people who would actually put like a block of wood on their shoulder, and they would walk around. And if somebody bumped into them, they'd be like, why'd you knock the wood off my shoulder? And they'd get in a fight, and they'd be justified at that point. And so when they say walking around with a chip on your shoulder, the idea is like you're walking around with something kind of precariously put there, and then as soon as somebody bumps into you, as soon as somebody knocks that chip off, then you have the right to fight them. And that's justifiable in our culture. And so, this is something that opens up that opportunity where if you do something wrong to somebody in an obit, they have the right, kind of to be mad at you, and they're going to take that opportunity. And I think that that's one thing to keep in mind. I can tell you one time I wrote an obituary and somebody gave me bad information. It was a colleague or a coworker of this guy who'd owned a restaurant, and he gave me information about this guy's sick illness, and he said a few things that they weren't true. And so the family read it, and they were really upset that we had put it that way. And they called, and and I had actually gone. I had gone home for the weekend. I did the story like on Friday night, and I was home on Saturday for my grandfather's like 80th birthday or something. And there was like a party we were having, or something like that. And so I'm there at this party, and I get this phone call from my boss, and they're like, they're really upset, they're really mad, and they realized that I had gotten bad information. So they weren't taking anybody's side other than my own. They were defending me, but they said, but the lady the daughter of this man still wants an apology. So you got to call her. So I'm like, all right, fine. So he gave me the number, I wrote it down, and I called him back while I was home, like right before I was ready to walk out the door to whatever this event was for my grandfather. And I called and I apologized. And the lady was nice about it, and I think she appreciated that I took responsibility. And that's one thing always to do as a journalist, is take responsibility and apologize, because that's part of how you keep your credibility, how you keep your good name. But the case is that, there was a case where I didn't really do anything wrong. I just got bad information. I wasn't even information that in the end was, really that. It wasn't information that was like horribly critical or negative. It wasn't anything unhappy. It was information. And so but they were upset, and they called and they told me about it. Okay. So I think you just kind of have to keep that in mind. There's a few areas where you're almost certain that if you're likely to get sued, or you're likely to get people yelling and mad at you. Obituaries are one, and another one is like anytime you write anything about courts or police reports, people will get mad. Like I used to love the ones people would call in and they'd be mad because they got arrested with 12 grams of coke instead of 15 grams or something like that. Well, the police report says 15. Well, it was only 12 grams. Okay, okay, as if that was what I'm going to sue because I only had 12 grams of coke on me. Well, you need to take that up with the police and tell them you only had 12 grams. They need to amend the report, and then we'll write a correction. And so the point is those are the kinds of things you're likely to get people calling you up irate over. They're things you really don't expect. I can tell you even to this day, the things that I would not even have thought were going to cause a stink are usually the ones that cause a stink. But obits are one of those areas where that's possible. Now, one other thing about obituaries is, they are about their life. Usually you start off kind of like the martini glass, where you start off kind of inverted pyramid, and then you usually give like a chronology of their life, and then kind of do the kicker at the bottom, something significant kind of going back to that. And what was I say? So, that's kind of the format I would do the stories in usually. But one of the things that sometimes comes up is, is can you write anything negative? Well, these aren't free obits. These they're not paid obits. These are obits you write. They're news stories. And so you need to keep in mind they are news stories. And if the person has done something that's negative in their lives, well, you don't have to focus upon it if that's not the focus of their lives. If they've done something negative, you can't shy away from it. Say, for example, tomorrow Rod Blagojevich dies, or George Ryan dies, both former governors of Illinois. If you just write about their gubernatorial career and you don't focus on the fact that they were arrested and spent time in jail or prison, then you're not really doing your readers a service. You're not writing this for the family. The family might be mad that you're focused on that, but you need to put that. So even if there's something significant that's negative, you should print that. You need to give their whole life, their whole story, anything that's significant about them. And it can be negative. Now, should it be all negative? No. But like I said, it's that martini glass. You might lead off with Rod Blagojevich, who was ended up going to prison as an Illinois governor, made known as a laughing stock for the state because of this, because he tried to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat. And you go on and on about that, and then you tell a little bit about what he did as governor, and then you give a chronology, right? So you're going to give him his whole life, but that's what he's known for. That's what his big thing is. And so if you don't have that, you're not doing your readers a service. So don't be afraid to say negative things. Don't be afraid to say positive things. But the case is, you give the whole story. This isn't paid. This is journalism. This is the truth. That's the way you do it.